There are people in this world who walk into every room and feel like an intruder. People who stand in a crowd and still feel unseen. People who grew up believing that home is something other people have, not them. This video is for them. Because the truth is simple and brutal. Some people don't belong anywhere, not because something is wrong with them, but because they were never given a place where belonging was possible. When you grow up in an environment where your personality, your emotions, or your needs don't match what everyone else expects, you learn very early that fitting in is not something that happens naturally. You don't blend, you don't match, you don't align. So you start doing what every psychologically exiled person does. You perform. You imitate the tone of others. You copy the rhythm of conversations. You study facial expressions like a foreign language. You adjust yourself constantly, like you're editing a version of you that nobody asked for. And slowly, painfully, invisibly you become someone who looks like they belong everywhere, while secretly belonging nowhere. This is the psychology of people who don't feel at home in the world. People who learn to carry their outsider label like a quiet tattoo. People who grew up watching others form bonds effortlessly while they stood on the edge, wondering why they could see everyone but nobody could really see them. Most of them aren't cold. Most of them aren't distant. Most of them aren't antisocial. They're just tired. Tired of forcing themselves into spaces that never wanted them. Tired of being too much in one place and not enough in another. Tired of feeling like every room has invisible rules they were never taught. And somewhere along the way, something inside them fractures. Not enough to break them, just enough to isolate them. The truth is, you don't become the kind of person who doesn't belong anywhere by accident. You become this way through a slow accumulation of tiny rejections, subtle exclusions, moments when the world tells you, you're different, you're strange, you don't fit here. You learn to keep your thoughts inside because people misunderstand you. You learn to keep your heart guarded because people misjudge you. You learn to keep your world small because the bigger it gets, the more alien you feel. And eventually you stop trying, not because you don't want connection, but because connection feels like a puzzle where every piece is the wrong shape. Yet despite all this, despite the loneliness, despite the emotional fatigue, these people have something rare. They see the world differently. They don't seek crowds. They seek meaning. They don't follow norms. They follow intuition. They don't fear solitude. They live in it like it's their native language. But behind all of that strength, all of that quiet observation, all of that emotional independence, there's a simple, painful truth. They want a place to belong. They just don't know where it exists. They don't belong anywhere, and the world never lets them forget it. Not at school, where everyone else sorted themselves into neat little groups while they sat alone, pretending they preferred it that way. Not at home, where their silence was mistaken for attitude, their sensitivity mistaken for weakness, and their dreams dismissed as nonsense. People who don't belong anywhere grow up learning one thing very early. The world is not shaped for them, and they must shape themselves to survive it. But here's the secret no one sees. They were never meant to fit. They were meant to observe, to sense the unspoken, to read the room before they even step inside. Because when you never feel like you truly belong, your mind becomes hyper-alert, not paranoid, just prepared. You start noticing everything. The tone behind someone's "Are you okay?" The tiny pause before someone changes the subject. The fake enthusiasm in a compliment that wasn't real. The distance in people's eyes when they decide you're different. People who don't belong anywhere grow up like ghosts walking through rooms full of noise. Always watching, always thinking, rarely speaking first. Not because they don't have anything to say, but because they learned their words rarely land the way they meant them. So they pull inward. They lean into solitude, not because it's comforting, but because it's the only place that doesn't reject them. And here comes the most painful part. They become excellent at adapting to everyone except themselves. They can switch personalities in seconds. They can match any conversation, any mood, any expectation. They can blend in just enough to avoid questions. just enough to avoid being noticed, but never enough to feel like they're really part of something. They live in a strange psychological space, too different to fit in, too sensitive to be numb, too aware to be carefree, too observant to be fooled. And deep down, they carry a quiet question that haunts them. Where is my place? What world was I meant for? They don't crave popularity. They don't crave attention. What they crave is something far more simple, yet painfully rare. A space where they don't have to translate themselves. A person who doesn't make them shrink or soften. A life where they're not too much or too little, but exactly enough. Until they find it, they wander emotionally, never lost, but never home. Always searching, never settling. Always close, never connected. People think they're antisocial, but the truth is the opposite. They feel deeply. They care intensely. They love quietly but fiercely. It's just that every time they tried to belong, they were either misunderstood or replaced or forgotten. So now they stay on the edges of life, observing, feeling, thinking, hoping one day they'll stumble into a place where they finally exhale and say, "Here I'm home." There is a strange moment that happens to people who don't belong anywhere. A moment they never talk about. A moment they often don't even understand themselves. It happens when they walk into a room full of people laughing, talking, connecting, and instead of feeling outside, they feel nothing at all. Not envy, not longing, not curiosity, just emptiness. Because people who never belonged anywhere eventually stop expecting to belong. They stop waiting for someone to understand them. They stop hoping for a place that finally feels like home. They stop searching for the group that will finally say, "You fit here." After years of drifting between friendships, identities, phases, environments, something inside them shuts down. Not out of weakness, but out of survival. You can only be the outsider for so long before your mind learns to detach first, so the world can't hurt you anymore. This is the first psychological truth. People who don't belong anywhere learn to numb themselves before others can disappoint them. It's not depression, it's protection. It's the quiet armor they built after realizing that people come and go, but the loneliness stays. And so they develop this strange habit. They behave like background characters in their own life. They sit on the edges of group conversations even when the group wants them there. They speak less even when they have something to say. They leave early even when nobody asks them to. They keep every friendship at a safe distance even when the person is genuine. Because when you've never belonged, closeness feels dangerous. Connection feels unpredictable. Being seen feels like a risk, not because they hate people, but because they've learned that people rarely stay. And here's the part most people don't know. People who don't belong anywhere are incredibly observant. While everyone else is talking, they're analyzing. While everyone else is bonding, they're studying patterns. While everyone else is forming groups, they're silently mapping human behavior. This is why they understand emotions so deeply. This is why they recognize lies immediately. This is why they feel things others never notice. Isolation gives them clarity that most people will never have. But this clarity comes with a price. They can read everyone except themselves. They can understand why someone else is insecure, angry, avoidant, or lonely. But they cannot understand why they can't feel connected, why they always feel misplaced, why they have this invisible distance between themselves and the rest of the world. And so they live with this two-sided reality. They crave connection, yet they fear it. They want belonging, yet they run from it. They feel separate, yet they don't know how to bridge the gap. People think they're cold. People think they're shy. People think they're indifferent. But the truth is simpler and sadder. They don't know how to exist in a world that was never built for them. They're not broken. They're not antisocial. They're not too quiet. They're simply people who learn to live without belonging so well, for so long, that now belonging feels foreign. And the most painful part, they don't even know where they lost themselves in the process. There is a moment in every outsider's life when they finally understand something devastating. It was never about finding a place. It was about realizing no place was ever built for them. People who don't belong anywhere live with a quiet truth most others never confront. They grow up watching everyone else fit into groups, families, circles, labels, while they become specialists in standing on the edge of every room, unnoticed, unnecessary, unmatched. But here's what most people don't see. These individuals don't feel like outsiders because they're strange. They feel like outsiders because they are aware. They see the subtext in conversations. They feel the shift in energy when they speak. They notice the tension behind smiles, the artificiality of welcome, the invisible distances people keep. They are hyper-tuned to every signal that says, "You're here, but you're not one of us." So they adapt. They learn to blend without attaching. They mirror without connecting. They talk just enough to seem involved, but never enough to reveal anything real. It's not that they lack identity. The world simply has no space for the one they carry inside. And over time, this disconnect becomes a second skin. They show up but never settle. They listen but rarely feel heard. They exist everywhere but belong nowhere. Eventually, they learn a painful habit, compartmentalizing themselves into versions that make other people comfortable. Around family, they are the quiet one. Around friends, the chill one. Around strangers, the polite one. Around everyone, the one who doesn't ask for much. And underneath all these roles is the real self, the one they've never had the chance to reveal because no environment has ever truly invited authenticity. But the most tragic part, people who don't belong anywhere often carry an emotional contradiction. They desperately want connection, yet they never trust it. They crave closeness, yet they prepare for abandonment before anyone even leaves. They long for a place to rest, but also don't believe such a place exists. They live suspended between worlds, too unique to blend in, too self-aware to pretend, too emotionally intelligent to accept superficial bonds. So they retreat, not because they want isolation, but because solitude is the only space where they aren't forced to shrink. At some point, belonging stops being a desire. It becomes a memory of something that they never had. But here is the truth that outsiders discover eventually, though it takes years. They were never meant to fit into existing spaces. They were meant to build their own, their mind, their depth, their intuition. It was never a weakness. It was a blueprint. The people who don't belong anywhere are the ones who create new worlds, new paths, new identities because the old ones were too small for them. There is one more truth about people who don't belong anywhere, and it's the part they rarely admit, even to themselves. It's the quiet, private realization that belonging was never the real goal. Not for them, not for the way they're wired. Because deep down, they know something others don't. Most groups only accept you if you shrink yourself, if you soften your edges, if you hide your complexity, if you stop asking questions, if you pretend to be someone that makes them comfortable, even if it makes you disappear. People who never belonged learned this early. They noticed how quickly people turn cold when you say something too honest, how friends pull away when you grow, how family gets uncomfortable when you show your real feelings. So they built a life where connection is desired but never trusted, where belonging is dreamed about but never expected. This creates a strange inner world, a world where you constantly feel like a visitor in your own life. You're there, but you're not of it. You're present, but you're not rooted. You're close, but never close enough to stay. And this shapes everything. They don't attach quickly, because they know attachments break. They don't open up easily, because vulnerability always had a cost. They don't rely on people, because inconsistency hurts more than solitude. They don't push themselves into groups, because forced belonging feels worse than loneliness. But here's the paradox no one notices. People who don't belong anywhere are usually the ones who see everything. They observe patterns others miss. They understand people's intentions before anyone else does. They sense shifts in energy, tone, silence, distance. They read a room the way an expert reads a book, effortlessly, precisely, quietly. Because when you stand on the outside long enough, You start understanding the inside better than the people living in it. And yet they still feel separate, different, untethered, not because they are broken, but because they grew in a world that never matched them. But here's the deeper truth. People who don't belong anywhere often end up becoming the ones who create their own place. Not a group, not a crowd, not a ready-made space, but something entirely new. A corner of the world shaped by authenticity, by depth, by emotional clarity, by honesty, by standards that actually protect their sanity. They begin to understand. It wasn't that they didn't belong anywhere. It's that they refused to belong in the wrong places. They aren't hard to love. They just won't accept a shallow version of love most people offer. They aren't too quiet. They just speak only when something is real. They aren't cold. They simply don't waste warmth on people who won't hold it gently. They aren't lost. They're searching for something meaningful enough to stay for. And when they finally meet the right people, people who feel like home instead of a performance, something shifts. For the first time, they don't feel like a stranger in the room. They don't feel like a misfit trying to decode human behavior. They don't feel like an outsider waiting for the moment everything falls apart. They finally feel what most people take for granted. Not belonging to the world, but belonging in it. And when that moment happens, their entire life begins again.